This is...
Meet the ocean.
Are we recording?
I'm pretty sure we are.
A sailor, there's
through
like
this sea of Adelie
the
penguins.
oceans are the biggest carbon sink of all.
Greetings, Meet the Ocean fans. This is your fearless co-host, Kelsey Anderson. Okay, maybe not as fearless as our polar diving founder. I also happen to be the sound designer for our Creative Conservation Consortium. That means I make the dolphins go, and the penguins go, and the bubbles go. Today we're headed to Miami Beach to experience a conversation between three nonprofit directors. Kate Fleming of the Bridge Initiative, Dr. Andy Szabo of the Alaska Whale Foundation, and our own Paul North, who played moderator for the event, which took place at the dazzling Faena Miami Beach Hotel. Normally when Paul puts on a suit, it's to go for a dive. But this time around, it was to raise funds for the Alaska Whale Foundation, also known as AWF. This will be our 5th podcast focusing on AWF, because their work with whales in Alaska is world-class. Before we dive in, though, there are some important updates to share. Meet the Ocean just celebrated its 5-year anniversary. This is an important milestone for any nonprofit, and you can hear all about it and learn how to support us in a recent podcast titled Current Events. Next up, our Penguin Pen Pal program won an Anthem Award for programs in environmental awareness. Give the gift of Antarctica to a loved one today, or even purchase a bulk package for a donation to a children's hospital on our website. Seriously though, it's really cool. Lastly, and for the 2nd year in a row, Meet the Ocean has been recognized by the Webby Awards as a top podcast in science and education. Fellow nominees are Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and our favorite green owl from Duolingo. As a small nonprofit, to be listed amongst such giants in the field of education is an honor indeed, and we would like to thank the International Academy of Digital Arts and Sciences for recognizing our efforts. Phew, that was a lot. But it also shows just how dedicated we are to sharing the value of our planet's saltwater ecosystems. You can always find more podcasts, underwater creatures, and ways to donate on our website, meettheocean.org. Now, let's go to Miami.
This evening's event really is to highlight our concerns about ocean conservation and the health of the oceans, and hopefully win your support for some of the efforts that we are proposing. But before I do that, I thought it would be helpful to take a few moments to introduce you to the research I do and to the animals that I study up in Alaska. I'm a whale biologist, and I'm usually presenting on whales, so I feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. But I think it's valuable too because it's through my research into these animals and my firsthand experience in Alaska that I've come to be concerned about the health of the oceans. So I figured this would provide a little bit of a context when we're having our conversation later as to where I've come from. This video here that you're seeing, that's a baby humpback whale. It's about 4 weeks old. It's under the watchful eye of its mom right there. We captured this video about 4 weeks ago in Hawaii. And the thing that I think is particularly notable about this video is it's capturing this intimate moment between a mom and her offspring that is completely unimpacted or undisturbed by humans. There are no humans present here. There haven't been humans present around these whales for several hours. In fact, the way we captured this video is we deployed a suction cup video camera on the back of this male whale right here that was attending to that cow-calf pair. And then we left them alone, and we went back to our lab. And as a result, we got this very privileged, intimate, quiet view of what these animals do when we're not watching. And those moments are increasingly rare, I would say, having these sort of intimate views of this cow-calf pair or any of the cow-calf pairs. And as I said, we captured this about 4 weeks ago in Hawaii. Now, that wasn't the reason why we were doing this, putting these cameras on these animals. What we were trying to do is we're trying to quantify nursing rates among these animals. Now that camera's on a calf, and as you're going to see, it's going to start suckling from its mom, And so we're trying to understand how much energy is being transferred from the mom to her calf in the form of milk, because we're concerned about how declining ocean productivity is impacting the ability of these females to raise their calves and to support their calf development. Now, this is just one aspect of the work that we're doing in Hawaii and in Alaska. Now, I've been working up in Alaska for about 20 years, a little more than 20 years. And one thing I can say is that even after 2 decades of research, I'm always amazed by the surprising ways that the lives of these animals parallel our own. That may be surprising to hear, but they do. For example, humpback whales, like us, are tool users. That might be a little bit surprising, but this whale right here is using a bubble net as a tool to corral its food. It's feeding on herring right here. And so it's actually quite a complex tool. And more than that, they have the capacity to modify those tools in response to different foraging contexts or social contexts. Here we have 2 different whales using a slightly different bubble net to forage on a different type of prey. This is krill in this instance here, and krill respond differently to bubbles than herring do. So they've modified that tool. And they will often use these tools in cooperative settings. This is a very coordinated behavior, right? That takes a great deal of awareness of what you're doing, what the others around you are doing. And incidentally, these are learned behaviors that are passed from individual to individual across generations, right? That, by the way, is the definition of culture, the transmission of learned behaviors between individuals within a population. Culture is very important to these animals, as it is with ourselves. So once you learn about the role of culture, for example, and the complexity of the behaviors that are being passed between individuals, it's perhaps no surprise that these animals know each other quite well. Humpbacks can live to be almost 90 years, 100 years old. Some of these whales right here, we know, have been traveling together and working together for over 30 years. And that's only as far back as our data goes. And here's the thing. This is all from above the surface. If you start to travel underneath the water with these animals, again, using these suction cup tags, I'm immediately struck by this sort of diverse vocal repertoire that the animals have. This is just this cacophony of sounds that the animals are making because they're communicating their intentions to one another, right? They all have roles, and they need to be able to communicate their roles while they're underwater, and that's almost certainly what these sounds are doing, communicating these roles. But if you stop and think about this suite of attributes I just described there, these animals can live to be 80 years old, 90 years old. They have these enduring bonds that will persist for many decades. They have complex communication, complex tool use. All these things are attributes we would typically ascribe to humans, not whales. But of course, we're now finding it in these whales as well. And this is the thing. If you just simply watch from above the surface, you don't see this. You can certainly miss all of this. Unless you have these tools and techniques, you may not understand what's really going on below the surface. And I raise that because in many ways that's analogous to when you stand on the shore and you look out at the ocean. We miss so much of what's going on under the waters because we just don't have the tools and techniques ourselves for looking at this. But I can say the people that do, the people that study these things, are all kind of leading to the same thing. The oceans are changing, and they're doing so dramatically. They're getting warmer, they're becoming oxygen depleted, they're rising, as I'm certain you know here in Miami, becoming more acidic, and this is having a profound impact on both terrestrial and marine ecosystems, and whether we like it or not, on ourselves. Now, I'm not an oceanographer. Again, I'm a whale biologist, but even through that lens, I have seen some of these impacts myself working up there in Alaska. For the last 6 years, there's been major declines in the number of offsprings being born to these humpback populations. In 2018, for example, 3 calves born to a population of about 3,000. That is a pretty dramatic decline in their numbers, right? And on top of that, we're finding a lot of whales that have really poor health. They're emaciated. This whale right here has all the indicators of an emaciated animal. It has bulging eyes. It has visible vertebrae. Its skin is peeling. It's covered in parasites. And this, too, is becoming increasingly common. We're seeing this a lot up in Alaska. And we're finding an abnormally high number of whales washing up on the beach dead. Since 2019, every year, 100 to 200 gray whales from Mexico to Alaska have washed up on the shore. We're seeing whales like this one that had long sighting histories that are completely disappearing from the population. These are alarming trends. These are the canaries in the coal mine, right? Whales are indicator species. When we see things like this happening to these whales, it strongly suggests that something is going on below the surface as well. Something is affecting or impacting their marine ecosystems. And it's not just whales that we're seeing this in. 1.5 million seabirds were wound up dead between 2013 and 2015 in the Gulf of Alaska simply due to this big warm water event that happened. And we're finding in commercially viable fish and zooplankton, the base of the food chain. All of this is consistent with a decline in ocean productivity, which itself is consistent with basically changing ocean conditions. Now, I don't want this to be a doom and gloom presentation. I hope that we can actually inspire you somewhat tonight. There's enough going on in the world right now that maybe that's not what we want to hear all the time. But there's two things that I hope we can take away from this conversation up here today. And one is we're at a tipping point. I don't know if any of you saw the recent United Nations Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change report that came out literally 3 days ago. This emphasized we are indeed at a tipping point. And if we don't do something soon about the oceans, we're going to have some very serious and dire consequences. But the other thing is there is still time, and there still are things that we can do. So again, I hope that's a message that we can take away from tonight.
Thank you, Andy. Again, my name is Paul North. I am the director of the nonprofit Meet the Ocean, a nonprofit that Dr. Andy Szabo is a board member of, the very reason I'm here tonight. We focus on science communication, specifically blending entertainment with the education to make it available to more audiences. You know, you boil all that down, and essentially I am a storyteller. Tonight, I get to share not only the stage, but the stories of some of the most dynamic people working in ocean conservation today. Each of us are very good at what we do, and the arsenal, the tool belt that we bring to ocean conservation is quite varied. When we think about this, we have to think about what the enemy is if we are actually fighting against something, and I would name it as apathy, specifically environmental apathy, and that not so small lie that an individual can't have an impact, because we are all individuals here tonight, but by gathering together, this is how the story gets told. This is how the message gets transmitted. With that said, I'd like to open it up, and Kate Fleming, you are the producer of this event.
Thank you.
So I kind of want to let the audience hear a little bit about your journey, a bit of a origin story. How did you get interested in conservation?
Well, I went to Antarctica back in 2015, and I was working in fashion for 19 years as a designer and art director. And the trip to Antarctica was really pivotal. It just was incredible to be in such a remote place, somewhere where humans really have never lived, and be able to see even there that there's human impact. One thing I witnessed was we were out looking at penguin colonies, and naturalists pointed out that the penguins were feeding their babies, and there was like a bit of blue in it, and they said that's ocean plastic. So to think about the fact that all the way in Antarctica we have spread, plastic through the oceans that far was really devastating, and I just thought I really wanted to do something about that. And then I also met Andy. He was the whale biologist on the boat. And I found him and his speech really inspiring, and just kind of thought about what can I do? And then it came to me that artists have the power to really tell more compelling stories often than just data alone, and that art has the power to make people fall in love with something. And when people love something, they want to protect it. So I started to come up with the idea of Bridge.
Scientists are not compelling, is what you're saying.
Yeah, basically.
Thank you. Thank you.
Except for Andy.
Slightly less.
Nothing more to say here.
I mean, they're not as articulate as you are. Okay.
A lot of adjectives.
Antarctica is a place that's dear to my heart. I work as a polar expedition diver, also known as being foolish enough to willingly get in the water. If you don't know, the increased salt content reduces the temperature, so the coldest water that I've been in is 27.2 degrees.
Isn't it 27 degrees water out here in Miami? We're talking Celsius.
Yeah, Celsius. Just switch it back and forth. But, Andy and I have been working in many places around the world. Much like Antarctica, Alaska has its appeal because just maybe in terms of math, think about how many people don't get to experience raw wilderness and the actual impact that can have on an individual or a community that exists either in proximity to it or within it. So how did Alaska affect you outside of the rigmarole of making an excellent film?
I first visited the field station in Southeast Alaska after the summer after the expedition to Antarctica. And I just was blown away. You know, it's such a beautiful, wild, untouched place. And it's really the last frontier, especially here in America. It's untouched wilderness. It's not managed. It's not national parks. It's just wild. And the feeling of being in that is just, it's incredible. It's awe-inspiring. It makes you feel small and really inspired for me.
Yeah, I don't know if many of you have been to Antarctica or been to Alaska. They are both an area of like profound wilderness and so forth. But there's a big striking fundamental difference between the two. Antarctica is a landscape of ice where everything is tied to the ocean and everything, for the most part, lives in the ocean. We think of penguins and seals and all these things. They're just coming up to nest for a brief window and the rest of the time they're in the water. Whereas you go up to Alaska, you have that same amount of wildlife, but you also have these untouched swaths of temperate rainforest. I mean, it is truly a treasure in this country. If you haven't been there, you definitely need to go. It's certainly near and dear to my heart.
You know, you have three people incorporating their talent for conservation, but of course that begs the question, you know, every day we wake up and we have something to do and we have a specific task. So I want to ask to both of you, and maybe even to myself if there's a mirror close by, why do you do what you do? What keeps you going?
Kate.
Okay.
I need a moment to think about this. I don't
Take
know
it in,
anymore.
people.
I don't know anymore.
I do it because I love the earth and the oceans and nature, and it's just, I feel like it, when I went to Antarctica, I really felt like this was my calling. This is what I'm supposed to do. And I spent a lot of my career making things cool, making people want to buy things, and I thought, how wonderful could it be if I switched that from fashion and make it about the earth and make it cool to love, to care, to protect the earth. So that's why I do it.
And you know, that coming from the arts is something that I have parallel with you. You with fashion, me with theater. Don't tell anyone, but I'm a published playwright. But I learned pretty early on that the stories that we were sort of regurgitating weren't satisfying to me. So taking the tools that theater provides for a storyteller and applying them to an ecosystem and then describing that ecosystem via a theatrical lens, via drama, via a narrative that a snail can actually achieve in its lifetime. These creatures are living out their lives, and for me that's an infinite playground, because not only am I encountering, you know, a new species as I'm trying to communicate it to the world, but I get to investigate it in an entirely new way. And that's kind of the power of the people that are on stage, I think, right now, is that invention, because conservation isn't new. Right? We understand that things are at stake, but I think what we all do is try to increase the priority, or dare I say, the urgency of this messaging, because all of that wonderful footage that Andy was showing us came with some pretty rough numbers, and out of sight, out of mind. We are exactly fighting against that in as many new ways and with as much dynamism as we can. But you didn't answer the question yet, my friend. Yeah.
Well, I want to say, first of all, I definitely lack the bravado and pomp and circumstance of Paul here when trying to get my message across as a theater major that I am not. And I do very much value the role that both of you play, and that's why, you know, it's so good to be working with you. I think I was kidding earlier that, you know, scientists tend to be pretty dry, and we are not good at crafting messages that resonate with people necessarily. We don't inspire people the way that artists and people like Paul can. So it's very good to be able to work alongside them to achieve our sort of shared objectives. In terms of what inspires me to do what I do, I can't really think of doing anything else anymore, unfortunately. I've been a biologist for as long as I can remember. I don't remember a time when that wasn't important to me, from being, you know, my grandparents' backyard watching birds when I was 5 years old in Burlington, Ontario, to see my first whale 11 and all these things. It really resonated with me. But you get to a place as a biologist where you're just inundated with heavy, bad news, unfortunately. That is really what the state of the science has come to. That's what you learn as a student. It's just hammered into you. And as a result, I can't necessarily see beauty in things anymore unless I can understand there's some wild processes going on, that there's some sort of ecological integrity underlying that system. And for me, Alaska is the only place left, certainly in the U.S., where you can really see that, where you can actually go up there and you don't have to squint to see what it looked like 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. You know, there's still, the island that I live on has the highest density of brown bears anywhere on the planet. You know, and it's the largest aggregation of humpback whales anywhere in the northern hemisphere. And it's like, you know, the largest swath of temperate rainforest left on the entire planet. That's very special. So I kind of feel privileged to be up there, but at the same time, I think I'm broken. I don't think I can go anywhere else. I think John Muir made a comment, or I might probably paraphrasing or misquoting, but it was something to the effect of like, Alaska is no place for young men because once you go there, you're ruined. You can't go anywhere else. And I kind of feel that way a little bit.
I've never heard that, but that makes sense to me
I
somehow.
think it was on my shirt earlier today.
Oh.
It was.
Well, we're talking about these far-off places, Alaska, Antarctica, but there's some great work being done by the woman sitting next to me just here locally. So would you like to tell some of the people about the Reef Line?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Well, with Jimena Caminos, who's out here tonight, and Colin Ford of Coral Morphologic, and a bunch of other amazing scientists and advisors, we have a project called the Reef Line, which is going to be a 7-mile artificial reef and sculpture park that we plan to make at a swimmable distance from shore. So it'll be right out here, actually, starting around 4th Street, a bit north of 4th Street, and then going across Miami Beach. And it's made by artists with Eco Concrete that has extra calcium carbonate, so corals are encouraged to propagate on it. And it's a, you know, ambitious but beautiful, long project here in Miami. So I think I'll be here for a while longer.
Heck yeah. I'm excited to dive it with my camera, I'll tell you that. And the beauty of that is you set it up and then you let nature take it from there.
That's right. When it's a success, it will be unrecognizable. You'll no longer see the sculptures because it'll be a collaboration between nature and the artist. But nature will hopefully win that.
Dare we say an ever-evolving art form? Marketing, people. Marketing.
All of these things, making policy decisions and management decisions and communicating with the public and bringing the public and winning the public support over for conservation really requires a couple key things. And one of those things is it requires data, it requires sound research. It requires monitoring programs that allow us to track the environment and see changes as they're occurring so we can allocate resources as necessary to those areas of concern. And it also requires research that can demonstrate how the impacts or how climate change or ocean warming are actually impacting marine ecosystems. We need hard data to support that. And that's kind of the one key area that we're working with this ocean health program is we're trying to develop this research program that will address those specific things. And we're not doing it alone. And I'm certainly myself not doing it alone. Paul alluded to the interns that we have. We have 10 interns every year that come and join us in the field. I kind of think of them as sort of the environmental stewards of tomorrow, so it is very valuable to be able to train them up in some of the skills they'll need to be successful conservationists moving forward. And we have graduate students and so forth. But we also have formed this big team of colleagues from the University of Alaska Southeast and Fairbanks and University of Hawaii and Glacier Bay National Park. So we're trying to make this big collaborative, comprehensive research program that addresses not just whales, even though that's where my interest lies, but basically the ecosystem from the bottom all the way to the top up in Alaska. And fortunately, we've secured industry support from Lindblad Expeditions. They're supporting the research by outfitting their ships with oceanographic sampling equipment that will allow us to passively collect data, oceanographic data, just everywhere they're running that will feed into this program. And we're working closely with National Geographic, who supports us financially, but more than that, they're giving us a platform to sort of spread our message. And that's really the second component of this program, is the outreach component, really finding a way to craft a message that reaches the people it needs to reach. And that's not just simply the stakeholders like policymakers and managers, but that's like people like yourselves. You know, it's the general public that we need to win over, because ultimately it's when we've captured the attention and the interest of the general public, that's going to start persuading people at higher levels that are able to make those impactful decisions. So that's why working with people like you, Paul, and you, Kate, is extremely valuable. Because as I keep saying, you know, kidding aside, I cannot craft the message the way that you guys can craft a message. I don't
He's
know
pretty
who said
good.
that. I don't know who said that. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
clearly there's a plant in the audience. No, just kidding. Everything Andy says is so valuable because, we live in a world of drawn lines, state to state, country to country, or even ocean to ocean. We give them different names, but in truth, it is one. And that's not a spiritual statement. It literally is one ocean. The currents are constantly cycling the water, the nutrients, the everything. For the smallest amount of perspective, there's about 180 different species that are shared between the Arctic Ocean and the Southern Ocean. Most of them are about this small. They're plankton, but they get carried between the poles in deep underwater currents. So, yes, Miami Beach, right over here, Alaska, very far away, but in time, they are all connected. And I think that's important for all of us to keep in mind.
This episode of Meet the Ocean was produced by Andrew Gettings and Paul North, with sound design and co-hosting duties by me, Kelsey Anderson. We would like to thank Faena Art, Kate Fleming, and Jimena Caminos for making the Alaska Whale Foundation fundraiser a success. Make sure to check out the Reef Line, an underwater sculpture park and artificial reef, which in the not-too-distant future will be swimming accessible to all Miami residents and visitors. As Meet the Ocean continues into the next 5 years of ocean science communication, we take great pride in highlighting the work of others and building a network of creative conservation. But to continue to do so, we need your support. Please consider donating to our 501c3 nonprofit, be it once, monthly, or annually. All contributions go to making sure those ocean stories reach those who need to hear. Until next time, may the salt water be with you.